A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
You know, Herman, I was looking at the landscape of modern data infrastructure yesterday, and I realized something slightly unsettling. If you stripped away everything with a feather logo on it, the entire global economy would probably grind to a halt within about 15 minutes.
You are probably being generous with that 15-minute window, Corn. If the Apache Software Foundation suddenly vanished, your bank wouldn't be able to process transactions, your favorite streaming service would stop recommending shows, and half the internet's traffic routing would just give up. It is the invisible backbone of the digital world. It is the paradox of the ASF. It is arguably the world's most important software organization, yet it absolutely refuses to act like a corporation.
It is a massive operation, which makes today's prompt from Daniel particularly timely. He wants us to dive into the Apache Software Foundation, or the ASF. Specifically, the unique way they govern projects, their funding model, and some of the heavy hitters like Kafka and Spark that are going through some pretty radical changes right now in March 26.
Herman Poppleberry here, and I have been waiting for this one. We often talk about individual technologies, but we rarely talk about the house they live in. The ASF is a 501c3 nonprofit, but it is not a corporation in the way most people think. It is more like a high-tech monastery or a meritocratic guild. As of this month, they are overseeing over 320 active projects and 32 incubating podlings. To put that in perspective, that is thousands of developers and millions of lines of code that power everything from your smart toaster to the Mars rover.
The scale is wild, but what stands out to me is how they differ from something like the Linux Foundation. Most people lump them together as just the open source people, but the structures are fundamentally different, right? I mean, both have big corporate sponsors, but the vibe is totally different.
The difference is night and day, Corn. The Linux Foundation is often described as Foundation as a Service. They have a professional staff, they handle massive marketing budgets, and they host massive events. If a big company wants to launch a project with a lot of fanfare and a PR blitz, they go to the Linux Foundation. The ASF is almost entirely volunteer run. There are no paid project leads. There is no centralized marketing department telling you which database to use. It is a decentralized collective where the power lies with the people writing the code, not the people writing the checks.
So it is less of a PR machine and more of a legal and philosophical framework. They have this phrase, community over code. It sounds like a nice sentiment you would see on a poster in a break room, but they actually take it quite literally. I have heard you say before that the code is almost secondary to the people.
It is the foundational law of the Apache Way. The idea is that a healthy community can always fix broken code, but a toxic or fractured community will eventually destroy even the most perfect code base. This is why they emphasize meritocracy. You do not get a seat at the table because your employer is a platinum sponsor like Amazon or Google. You get a seat because you showed up, wrote code, fixed bugs, and earned the trust of the existing maintainers. In the ASF, you are an individual contributor first. Your corporate badge stays at the door.
That meritocracy part is interesting because it feels increasingly rare. In a world where corporate interests usually dictate the roadmap of every major tool we use, the ASF seems to be holding a very strange line. They have over 65 corporate sponsors, including Meta and Microsoft, but those companies cannot actually buy a board seat. How does that work in practice? If I am a platinum sponsor giving hundreds of thousands of dollars, don't I want a say in what happens?
You might want it, but you won't get it. That is a crucial distinction. The funding is strictly decoupled from the technical governance. The revenue from those sponsors goes toward paying for the servers, the legal defense funds, and the infrastructure. It does not go toward telling the Kafka team what features to prioritize. Just look at the board of directors elected on March 5th of this year. You have people like Zili Chen, Shane Kukuru, and Jean-Baptiste Onofre. These are individuals elected by the foundation members based on their long-term commitment to the community, not representatives sent by a corporate board to protect a bottom line.
It is a fascinating social experiment that has somehow survived for over 25 years. But let's get into the actual tech, because that is where the rubber meets the road for most of our listeners. We just had a major milestone with Apache Kafka 4.1.2 on March 17th. For the uninitiated, Kafka is the industry standard for event streaming, but for years it had this one annoying shadow following it around called Zookeeper.
The removal of Zookeeper is the defining architectural shift for Kafka in the mid-20s. For a long time, if you wanted to run Kafka, you had to manage a separate cluster of Zookeeper nodes just to handle the metadata and leader elections. It was a massive operational burden. It was like needing a second smaller car just to carry the keys for your main car. If Zookeeper went down, Kafka went down. If Zookeeper had a latency spike, Kafka had a latency spike.
And with the 4.0 release, and now this latest bug fix version in March, they have fully transitioned to KRaft, or Kafka Raft. It moves the metadata management directly into Kafka itself. What does that actually mean for a developer or a DevOps engineer on the ground? Is it just one less thing to install?
It is much more than that. It means significantly lower latency for metadata operations and a much simpler deployment story. You no longer have to worry about the split-brain scenarios where Zookeeper and Kafka disagree on who is in charge. It makes the system more resilient and easier to scale to millions of partitions. But what I find more interesting right now is what is happening with Apache Spark. Just last week, on March 19th, Databricks announced general availability for real-time mode in Spark structured streaming.
I saw that. They're claiming sub 100 millisecond latency. That feels like a direct shot at Apache Flink, which has always been the king of low latency streaming. It seems like the big data world is having a bit of a civil war.
It is a total convergence of the ecosystem. For years, the trade-off was simple. Use Spark if you have massive batches of data and can wait a few seconds. Use Flink if you need millisecond responses. Now, Spark is aggressively moving into Flink's territory, and the way they are doing it involves another project that just graduated to a top-level project on March 5th, Apache Gluten.
Gluten is such a strange name for a data project. I assume it is not about wheat protein, although I am sure some developers are gluten-free.
It is about gluing native compute engines to Spark. Here is the technical bottleneck. Spark is written in Scala and runs on the Java Virtual Machine, or JVM. While the JVM is great for many things, it has a lot of overhead when it comes to memory management and garbage collection during heavy data processing. It is like trying to run a Formula One race in a heavy winter coat. Gluten allows Spark to offload those heavy compute tasks to native engines like Velox, which is written in C++.
So you get the familiar Spark API that everyone knows, but under the hood, it is running native code that bypasses the Java limitations. That sounds like a massive performance jump. Are we talking about marginal gains here?
Not at all. The benchmarks are showing 2 to 3 times speedups for standard analytical workloads. It is part of this broader trend we are seeing in 26, where the managed languages like Java are handing off the heavy lifting to native code. It is about efficiency and cost cutting. If you can run your Spark jobs twice as fast, your cloud bill from Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud gets cut in half. That is a language every CFO understands.
Which brings us back to the role of the foundation. If a company like Databricks is pushing Spark so hard, why does it matter that Spark lives at Apache instead of just being a Databricks product? Why should I care about the feather logo if Databricks is doing the heavy lifting?
It matters because of the single vendor trap. We have seen this play out recently with projects like Redis and MongoDB. Those were single vendor projects. When those companies decided they weren't making enough money from cloud providers, they changed their licenses to source available, versions that are much more restrictive. They essentially pulled the rug out from under the open source community. We talked about this back in episode 677, Beyond the Green Check, where we looked at how these license shifts are changing the trust model of the internet.
Right. They moved away from the Apache License 2.0, and that is a move the ASF explicitly rejects. If a project is at Apache, it is guaranteed to stay under that permissive license. It provides a level of safety for architects. You can build your entire company on Kafka, or Spark, knowing that a single CEO cannot wake up tomorrow and decide to charge you a tax for using it.
It makes Apache the Switzerland of the tech world. It is a neutral ground where competitors can collaborate. Think about Apache Polaris, which also graduated to a top-level project on March 5th. Polaris is a vendor-neutral catalog for Apache Iceberg. Now, Iceberg has been a huge topic for us lately. It is that high-performance table format for massive datasets. But the catalog part is where the fighting usually happens.
The catalog is the phone book for your data, right? It tells the compute engine where the files are located. Until recently, every vendor wanted you to use their specific catalog, because that is how they lock you into their ecosystem. If I use your phone book, I have to use your phone.
By graduating Polaris as a neutral, Apache-governed project, the Foundation is providing a way for companies to keep their data in a format that any engine can read, whether that engine is Snowflake, Starburst, or Cloudera. It is a massive win for data sovereignty. It prevents the walled garden effect that has plagued enterprise software for decades. It ensures that the metadata, the very map of your data, belongs to you, not your vendor.
It feels like the ASF is acting as a stabilizer in a very volatile market, but they are facing some pretty serious external pressure right now, particularly from regulators. I was reading about the European Union's Cyber Resilience Act and the new AI Act. These laws are putting a lot of liability on software maintainers for security vulnerabilities. How does a volunteer group handle that?
This is a huge concern for 26. If you are a volunteer-run organization and a government tells you that you are legally liable for a bug in a piece of code someone wrote 10 years ago, that is an existential threat. The ASF joined the Open Regulatory Compliance Working Group late last year to fight this. They are trying to explain to regulators that you cannot treat a volunteer collective the same way you treat a trillion-dollar corporation. If you make it legally dangerous to contribute to open source, people will simply stop contributing.
It is the classic problem of bureaucrats not understanding the meritocracy model. They want a single neck to wring when something goes wrong. But at Apache, there isn't one. There is only the community. It is like trying to sue a language because someone wrote a mean letter in it.
And that community is expanding into some very cutting-edge areas to prove its relevance. Look at Apache HugeGraph, which graduated to a top-level project in February. They are focusing heavily on Graph RAG, which stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation.
Okay, let's break that down for the non-AAI experts. Everyone knows RAG by now. It is how you give an LLM access to your private documents, so it doesn't hallucinate as much. How does a graph database change that? Why do I need a graph instead of just a standard vector search?
Standard RAG usually relies on vector search, which is great for finding similar chunks of text. But vector search is bad at understanding complex relationships. If you ask an AI how is person A related to company B through their previous board seats, a vector search might find the names, but it might struggle to connect the dots. A graph database like HugeGraph maps those relationships explicitly as nodes and edges. By combining graph structures with large language models, you get much more accurate and sophisticated reasoning. The fact that the ASF is now hosting a top-tier project for this shows they are not just maintaining legacy. Big data tools, they are right at the center of the modern AI stack.
It is impressive that a volunteer organization can move that fast. But I want to go back to the human element of this. We talked about Daniel's prompt and his background in tech communications. He sees this from the perspective of someone who has to explain these complex systems to others. If you are a developer today, does the Apache Way actually affect your daily life? Or is it just background noise? Does it help you get a job?
It affects your career longevity more than almost anything else. If you become a contributor or a committer on an Apache project, that is a portable credential. It is not tied to your current job. If you work at a company and build a proprietary tool, that knowledge stays there when you leave. If you build Apache Airflow or Apache Superset, your reputation is public and verified by the community. In episode 1121, we talked about the contributor paradox and whether open source is dying because of private repositories. The ASF is the strongest counterargument to that trend. It is still the best place to build a career-proof reputation.
That is a great point. It is meritocracy in its purest form. You can't fake your way into being an Apache committer. You have to ship code that works, and you have to play well with others. And because the Foundation handles the boring stuff, the legalities, the trademarks, the infrastructure, the developers can just focus on the engineering.
Though they are modernizing that boring stuff too. They launched the Tooling Initiatives model late last year to modernize their developer environments. They are moving away from some of the older, clunkier mailing list structures toward more modern integration with platforms like GitHub while still maintaining their independence. It is a delicate balance. You want the modern tools, but you don't want to become dependent on a single private platform. They are essentially building their own sovereign developer stack.
It sounds like the ASF is essentially a social protocol for collaboration. It is a set of rules that allows people who might even be competitors in their day jobs to work together on the plumbing of the internet. It is like two rival construction companies agreeing on the size of the pipes so the whole city can have water.
That is exactly the right way to look at it. It is a protocol for trust. When you see that Apache license, you know what you are getting. You are getting software that is free to use, free to modify, and free from the threat of sudden licensing changes. That is why the ASF explicitly rejects the source available trend. They believe that true open source requires vendor neutrality. Without that neutrality, you don't have a community, you just have a customer base.
It is a principled stand, and in 26, it feels more important than ever. With all the fragmentation in the AI and data space, having a neutral ground where the plumbing can be standardized is what prevents the tech world from becoming a series of disconnected walled gardens. But I wonder, can this model survive the increasing regulatory burden? If the EU's AI Act makes it too expensive to be a neutral ground, what happens?
That is the big question. The AI Act is particularly tricky because it defines high-risk systems in a way that could catch a lot of open-source projects in its net. The ASF has to prove that their community over code model actually leads to better security and more transparency than the code behind closed doors model of proprietary vendors. They are arguing that open governance is a security feature, not a liability.
I think they have a strong case. When you have thousands of eyes on the code and a meritocratic process for approving changes, you generally end up with more robust systems. Look at the Kafka transition to KRaft. That was a massive multi-year effort involving hundreds of people from dozens of different companies. It was done in the open, with every design document public and every debate recorded. That kind of transparency is a security feature in itself. You can't hide a backdoor in a project that has that many people watching the commit logs.
It is the ultimate audit trail, and it is not just for the big names. We should mention the incubator. There are 32 podlings right now, projects that are learning the Apache Way. This is where things like Apache Wayang, the data orchestration framework named after Javanese shadow puppetry, or Apache Tclave for confidential computing are being refined. The incubator is essentially a school for how to build a sustainable community.
It is like a venture capital firm, but instead of looking for a 10x return on investment, they are looking for a 10x return on community health. If the community isn't diverse and self-sustaining, the project doesn't graduate. They don't care how good the code is if only one person knows how to maintain it.
And that is a high bar. Many projects never make it out of the incubator, but the ones that do, like Gluten and Polaris this month, have proven they can survive without a single corporate parent. They have reached escape velocity from their original creators.
So, if we are looking at the practical takeaways for our listeners, it seems like there are two main angles. For the architects and decision makers, it is about risk mitigation. Choosing an Apache project is a hedge against vendor lock-in and licensing rug pulls. It is the safe bet for the long term.
And for the developers, it is about the Apache Way as a philosophy for your own work. Even if you aren't contributing to a major foundation project, the principles of meritocracy, transparency, and putting community health over the immediate needs of the codebase are what make for a long and successful career in this industry. It is about building things that last longer than your current employment contract.
It is a good reminder that behind all these complex distributed systems and native compute engines, it is still just people in a room or a mailing list trying to agree on how to build something that lasts. It is a social contract as much as a technical one.
The fact that it works at this scale, with 320 projects and over 8,000 committers, is one of the most impressive achievements of the Internet era. It is proof that humans can collaborate at scale without a central authority or a profit motive driving every single decision.
Well, I think we have covered a lot of ground here, from the death of Zookeeper to the rise of native Spark acceleration with Gluten. It is a lot to digest, but it gives you a much deeper appreciation for that little feather logo. It is not just a brand, it is a promise of stability in a very unstable market.
It is a heavy feather, corn. It carries the weight of the global economy on its back.
Indeed. We should probably wrap it up there. We have touched on the governance, the funding, the major technical shifts in 26, and the looming regulatory hurdles. It is a fascinating time for the ASF, and I suspect we will be talking about them a lot more as the AI Act starts to take effect.
Before we go, a quick thank you to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes and making sure our own community stays healthy.
And a huge thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the generation of this show. We couldn't do these deep dives into native compute and graph databases without that compute power.
If you found this exploration of the Apache Software Foundation useful, consider leaving us a review on your podcast app. It really does help other people find the show and understand the invisible backbone of their digital lives.
You can also find our full archive and all the ways to subscribe at myweirdprompts.com. We have covered a lot of these individual projects like Iceberg and Airflow in more detail there if you want to dig into the technical weeds.
This has been My Weird Prompts. Thanks for listening.
Catch you in the next one.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the flows from sloth